Call to order a work session of the Planning Commission. We're here to listen to Clarion and Darcy talk about our Northwest Superior sub-area planning. Do you have a presentation? Is that what we're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I can
Or is that,
I can
or is that
preface
Steven?
it, but it's mostly going to be Darcy today. We're just here to touch base on the kind of like a kickoff for the Northwest area sub-area planning. So we have 3 phases that are coming up in the spring, summer, and fall, kind of wrapping up towards September. And so Darcy's just here to kind of recap what we've done so far, touch base on the plan for the future, and make sure that everyone's on the same page and we kind of have the same understanding about the steps moving forward. Get any last minute feedback for this first phase, and then kind of outline the 3 phases that we're proceeding into. So.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. Glad to be back. And as Stephen said, wanted to just kind of give you guys a quick update on where we are. Where's this guy instead here? And I will figure this out here.
Keyboard may not be turned on.
Okay.
It's easier to flip through that way.
There we go. Okay. So yeah, why don't we start with a quick recap. So overall objectives, we went through some refinements. Chairman McCool worked through that with us, with the town board. We spent quite a bit of time kind of refining our overall approach, and I think just kind of highlights of where we landed. Really what we've set out to do with this next phase of the process is to kind of establish that broader vision for Northwest Superior and some specific goals for the different opportunity areas that we talked about in the fall. So we'll touch on kind of where we landed on those here in a moment. But I think really wanted to emphasize that this is kind of absolutely a phase 2. There's a lot of input that we got during phase 1. So we have been going through over the last month and just kind of combing through that information again, kind of trying to glean out kind of the themes that we've heard in more detail. And think about how we want to frame the discussion for this next step. And so that's really what we wanted to get some feedback from you guys on tonight, is just kind of thinking through some of those specific questions that we feel like we need to really dive into further. And as we get back into the community outreach here starting in May, and I'll talk about some of the specifics of that going forward. And then one of the things that really came out of the work sessions with the board, the conversations you guys had with the board, was really this emphasis on thinking about what strategies are there to implement the community's preferred vision that come out of this process, and that's really kind of a pause, if you will, at the end of our next steps in the work before we move forward with anything beyond that, is to really think about what opportunities might we have to implement the community's vision, and what's the best way to do that? Is that something we want to do? And so that's really kind of where we conclude our work for this next phase, is with that focus on the implementation strategies. So just to kind of quickly recap kind of what we'd heard for the different opportunity areas, we're going to carry forward this general framework as a way to just talk through some of the community preferences and kind of dial in on some of the specific concerns, possibilities that we might want to explore in each of these areas. So, I think one of the things that we have been reminded of as we've been going back through the materials that came out of the fall outreach is that there are definitely some areas where we've got very clear consensus on certain things, and areas where we, it's a little bit more all over the map. And I think 76th Street properties is one of those areas where I think there just really wasn't a lot of clear consensus coming out of that initial outreach. I think one of the things that we really feel like we need to do as part of this process is kind of help frame this area within the context of the rest of Northwest Superior. So the work that we'll talk about on the market assessment that EPS is helping us with, how does this relate to the marketplace and other things? I think, some people said, well, we want to see neighborhood retail there, those types of things, and just really kind of helping explore the relationship between this area and the other uses that may come out of the process, and what's really viable in that location. Is it the direction that's currently in the plan, or are there some other opportunities that we need to look at? The marketplace, I think, is one of the areas where we feel like we've got a lot of consensus on kind of the core components. So access, circulation, all of those things that people were really focused on, as well as trying to get a handle on the vacancies in that area, and kind of thinking about that short-term strategy. How can we shore up the retail framework that's there now, but then thinking about that long-term vision that was really kind of painted by the ULI study that was done. And so this is another area where the market study will really kind of help inform the opportunities that we explore. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But I think coming out of the fall outreach, I think the areas where we had not a lot of clarity was really surrounding housing. I think some people were very much in favor of housing in that location, potentially higher density housing, and recognize that, that may really kind of help address some of the concerns we have related to retail, and that's really something we need to kind of pursue. That was kind of the direction coming out of the ULI study. But there were concerns from others about the density, intensity of those uses, so that's something that we'll kind of explore as we get into the opportunity area. Alternatives is, how might that play out, and what are some of the options that we might look at? What does that mean from a land use standpoint in terms of how many units we're talking about? What sort of scale are we talking about if we were to carry out some of the recommendations that came out of the ULI study? And then thinking about how this area, potential changes in this area might impact some of the circulation considerations, the traffic considerations that have come up in a variety of the conversations that we've had. So there's some pretty big questions we need to explore, but we've got a strategy to kind of work through those that I'll touch on here in a minute. And then Original Town, I think a lot of common themes, but this is really where we just need to get into more specifics. And so we'll touch on some of the work that Sung's been doing in terms of going through existing zoning, starting to frame up, what's possible today, and, kind of thinking about, based on some of the concerns that were raised, what might some strategies be that we can look at. So one of the big questions here is really to kind of have a more in-depth conversation with the community about whether or not the idea of having design standards for this area is something that the community wants to pursue. And if so, what does that look like? Is it something that's, fairly general, more guideline type approach? Is it something where you may want to look at some possible changes to your development standards? The question of housing options is another thing that we want to explore specifically. The idea of the ADUs came up in our earlier conversations. So those are things that we'll kind of dive into a little bit more. And then lastly, the Second Avenue property, obviously there's been a lot of discussion about this, particularly at the board level. And so we're not intending to reinvent the wheel here. There's been a lot of concepts done for this site, a lot of things that have been explored. I think community support expressed for some of those other, so we really intend to kind of revisit those initial plans that were put together and, try to dive in a little bit deeper in terms of, what people can live with and what they can't. How do we kind of move that forward or help move that forward through this process in terms of what the expectations are for that particular property, and, have some clear policy direction going forward that can help move that forward in the future. And then, I think just general issues and opportunities. So as we think about the area as a whole, we'll be asking more questions about some of these things that we heard from the community in terms of how to tie it all together. And that's really, one of the biggest challenges I think about this this area is just, how do we kind of create those connections between the different pieces that we've been talking about. So this is all kind of background that we'll be using to help feed into where we can some preliminary goals, or guiding principles, however those shake out, in terms of, what should we be using as our guideposts for future development. We'll test those with the community when we come back in May, and then continue to refine those as we go through the process. But this is kind of our foundation for that work. So just to give you a quick update, we've got a number of tasks that we've been working on. We're referring to as kind of our foundational tasks. This is really work that needed to be done to give us more information to take back to the community. One of those pieces is the market assessment, which I mentioned Economic and Planning Systems is helping with. Matt Prosser is working with us on that. He worked with me on the comp plan work. He was also involved in the ULI study, so he's very familiar with Superior and the regional context that we're dealing with here in terms of market demand. And then we're working on some different kind of inventory and analysis work that I'll talk about here in a second. So in terms of the market assessment, what we're really looking for, what we've asked Matt to focus on, is really trying to give us some underpinning to potential recommendations for this process. So, starting with the ULI recommendations, knowing what's happening in downtown Superior and what the long-term plans are there. What's realistic to expect in terms of potential changes for the marketplace, both in the near term, so say 3 to 5 years, but also the long term, maybe 10 to 20 years, and how can the town best position itself and work with the folks at the marketplace to kind of achieve the vision that you're really looking for. So that's what we've asked him to do. There's some particular questions that kind of came up in those themes I mentioned, but really kind of thinking about both that short-term and the longer-term strategy, and then thinking about how it fits with the rest of Northwest Superior. So Matt's approach is really kind of building on the ULI study work that has been done. He is going to be following up. He started that process this week of reaching out to some key business stakeholders to get some specific feedback. It was 2012 when we finished the comprehensive plan, and that market work would have been done in 2011. The ULI study provided some of that, but it's really kind of digging in a little bit deeper in terms of what's happening along the 36 corridor. What are you seeing in terms of trends, within the marketplace? We know there's a lot of vacancies, but what aren't people finding that they're looking for? Why are they leaving? Just trying to really get to the bottom of some of the questions, some of the issues that we've seen. So some sample stakeholder questions that kind of give you a sense of the types of things that he'll be digging into. What's the role of housing potentially? Would that be attractive for tenants in the future? Those types of things. So, so those initial interviews will be happening, over the next 2 to 3 weeks, and then I think as we talk more with you guys and with the town board, we anticipate there may be some supplemental outreach that needs to happen, but that's kind of a starting point for that work. And so Matt's role is really to kind of help set the stage for the initial opportunity area kind of scenarios that we'll be bringing to the community in May. So with some preliminary findings from the market research, but we won't really finalize that with him until after we've met with you all in June and July to kind of, convey what we heard from the community, talk about maybe what's missing, where do we need a little bit more information, if so, and kind of go from there. So ultimately that will be, a market study kind of white paper that you guys can use. That'll be relevant, not just here, but for the town as a whole. And that's something that will kind of play out during the process, but we'll have some preliminary findings for that May work. And then Sung has been working on putting together kind of a basic capacity analysis. Stephen had done some kind of back of envelope analysis in terms of vacant lots primarily within original town when we did the work in the fall. But we've gone further in terms of, what the question came up during our outreach, what does the ultimate build out of Northwest Superior look like? If we're talking, so we have a baseline to have a conversation of, all right, if we build out according to the comp plan we have now, we're looking at X number of people, X number of jobs as an estimate. So where would we be going above and beyond that if we start to look at other alternatives for the marketplace, and then we can kind of dive into what does that mean in terms of the traffic model and, other considerations that the community might have. So we've got a preliminary breakdown of housing units, non-residential square feet, translating that into population and kind of going from there. So that'll be our baseline information we can use to kind of play with as we go through the scenarios. And then Cheney Bostick is another one of our team members. She has an architectural background. She is helping us primarily with the marketplace component to help model some of the alternative scenarios. So this is just kind of her getting her mind around some of the kind of existing context piece. This will be kind of our baseline that we can then plug in kind of massing models, overall mix of uses, that type of stuff to help people understand the relationships. I think one of the things that really struck me in looking at these the first time was, how much the surface parking really starts to pop out. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot, but I think this angle really kind of emphasizes that. But she'll also be looking at and working with Matt to kind of explore, what potential reuses might there be for, the empty Sports Authority building, those types of things. So how can we think about kind of a phased strategy for the marketplace that gets us where we want to go, recognizing that, it's probably going to need to be incremental, both in terms of cost and market. So those are the types of things that we'll be looking at. So that's just kind of initial where we're headed with that. And then Sung and I have been working on kind of just going through what's on the books today in Original Town and starting to frame up, what could be built under your current zoning. We heard a lot about, the more recent development and what people didn't want to see, I think. So we're trying to get a handle on, your code is fairly concise in terms of what's in there today. So not a lot of parameters to deal with, but I think what we're finding is, those do have certain implications in terms of, what's possible. The lot coverage is relatively high. The building height is, quite a bit higher than what your average height is out there today. So we'll have all those statistics and just, as a reference to kind of help inform the conversation. And we'll also look at, what types of standards are typical in an area like this, in kind of neighboring communities, just to have that context in terms of, we'll definitely get questions about, is this realistic? What are other communities doing? So we'll have that information available as well to kind of help inform the conversation as we go. So lots of background information there, and I think, kind of how we intend to use this, and one of the things I was hoping to get some discussion going on tonight is we had asked initial conversation in the fall with the polling about, do you think, design standards or some other types of tools are needed for Original Town? We had a good portion of folks who said yes, other folks who weren't quite sure what that meant and wanted, maybe, but let's talk about it. And so we want to kind of dive into that let's talk about it part of it, starting with some of the specific issues that people, did acknowledge as their primary concern, and that really related to scale and mass. And so we can kind of say, okay, if that is, we heard this is one of your primary concerns, so here are some potential ways that we can look at that and then ask the question, are you comfortable with any or all of those types of alternatives? Whether that's potentially reducing lot coverage or potentially looking at reduced height. Those are types of things that you might see in an area like this as possible ways to look at that. The other thing that came up as we were starting to look at this is the front-loaded garage. It's not typical in Original Town. It's and that's something we want to ask the community. Is that concerning to you that someone can build a pretty large house with a front-load garage next to your homes that don't have that? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Everybody has a different opinion about that. So those are the types of questions that we'd like to explore. And I think specific ideas that you guys have about this a particular issue would be helpful to hear as well. as we go through that work. But talk a little bit about the community engagement strategy, and then we can kind of circle back here. But just to give you a sense, Stephen mentioned, we're on a pretty quick timeline here. We started a little later than we intended, but I think this has actually worked out pretty well in terms of trying to get in the initial next step of outreach before school lets out. So we've got a meeting scheduled towards right before Memorial Day to go through kind of phase 1 and phase 2. So phase 1 we have been working on over the last month. We'll be finishing that up over the coming weeks. And that's really the market analysis, the inventory work, kind of all that basic stuff we needed. What we'll be diving into next, and kind of, where you guys can help us the most, is really the phase 2 work in terms of those opportunity area scenarios and helping frame up those questions. So that's what we're looking to take to the community in May, is really, here's some supplemental information about each of these areas, some of the questions, and kind of work through those alternatives. And then based on what we hear then, we will come back to the Planning Commission and the Town Board. I think our dates in June are probably going to shift slightly. You guys we may be meeting with earlier. Town Board may be in July, but point is we want to come back and check in with you all, let you know what we heard from the community once we've got the online input summarized, and kind of talk about, where do we go from there. So we'll have multiple points to touch base with you and kind of make sure we're on the right track. But the goal is to come back to the community with kind of preliminary preferred, directions for each of the areas and the area as a whole, just to kind of confirm what we've heard and make sure we're on the right track. And that would be the point where we can say, okay, this is what we've heard. Here's where we think the community wants to go. Here's, 1 or 2 ways that might move forward. And, that's the conversation we have at that point with the Town Board and Planning Commission about how might we implement this desired direction. So we're looking to wrap up by early October with that work. And in terms of our first series here, we are going to do another business community focus group. This is one Matt will be very involved in. That will really kind of dig into more of the market analysis piece, talk specifically about some of those marketplace issues. We did a lunchtime meeting last time. We're hoping we can, now that we have some specific information to share, we can get more folks at that meeting. We may need to do some, go to them meetings as well that afternoon. But our goal is to do that meeting here at Town Hall, and then we've got another 2 evening meetings scheduled, one at the fire station, and then we're at the sports stable community room this time as our second meeting. So those will happen in the same week, and then we will also have the online input opportunity again, which, again, that worked really well last time. I think we had 450 or, quite a few folks that took the time to do that. So we're hoping that we've got enough range here that we can get a lot of feedback, as much or better than we did as we did last time. And then thinking about kind of how might the presentation flow for the initial one of those meetings, the community meetings. We'll give them a brief recap of what we heard, kind of what we talked about tonight. Give them a little bit more detail about the market context. So what have we found? What are some of those preliminary findings in terms of, what's reasonable to expect Superior to absorb, over the next 5-10 years, and then walk through each of the opportunity areas and talk a little bit about, kind of some of the specific issues, the options, and then ask some questions. We'll have a lot more discussion, I would imagine, kind of in between the areas in this round, because we've got more to talk about, and I think it'll be easier for folks to kind of hear a little bit about one particular area, discuss it, answer some questions, and then we move on. But would love to hear your feedback if you have other thoughts on that. But that's our initial thinking. So it'll be a kind of a mix of additional information, some polling questions, and then just some open-ended discussion is our initial plan. Yeah, and this is just a little bit more detail on kind of how we're kind of framing up the each of the opportunity areas. So yeah, I think coming out of our May meetings, hopefully we've got kind of a pretty clear direction coming out of the, for each of the opportunity areas. And then, a little bit more clarity. If there is more information that we need, we can kind of circle back around and work on that piece over the summer while folks are away and bring that back to them in the fall. So I will stop there, and we can circle back on anything that you guys like.
I really appreciate the detailed presentation, and I think your plan for, where we're at now, recapping what you've heard, next steps for community outreach and check-ins. I think it sounds really great. My only little bit of a concern, but I don't know that there's anything we can do about it, is just the dates of the meeting. It's the last week of school around here, and it's just a really busy time with a lot of families. But I know we're trying to balance that with the overall desire to keep the project moving forward, and I don't know that there's a good week. So
that's the end of May.
Yeah.
May 21st, 23rd.
Yeah. It's just the last week of school. It's always a really busy
I
time. But
looked at my calendar and I'm like, I didn't see anything there.
But I don't know that there's any, I don't know that there's any good weeks. So I think that just will come down to outreach and making sure we get the word out to the community. And you've given them, a couple different choices. So
Last day of school is the 24th.
yeah.
What were those, the meetings on the 21st and the 23rd, Darcy?
Correct.
One was here in the town hall at lunch, and
Yep.
then there was two more at the fire station and the sports stable.
Yeah. So 2 on the 21st, 1 on the 23rd.
Okay.
Yeah, and what we were running into was just trying to get all of the work done to get to
Yeah,
the meetings.
yeah.
And so I think, one of the options we kicked around, I don't know if it's better or not, but was, maybe you do one before school gets out and one after, but, it's
I like
hard to-
having them in the same week. I think it's
hard
good
to
to
do
keep
that.
that
Yeah.
consistent.
Okay.
And I'm not sure from the online, if we're going to tape the meetings so that folks, if they're not able to attend a meeting, that they could maybe watch the meetings online, so
That's
then
a
they're
great
able
idea.
to respond to the feedback without feeling like they have to attend. So maybe we can just think through some of the logistics, or making the entire presentation available, as part of the online questionnaire. Little things, but I don't know that you're going to get around dates this time of year. I think it's just something to think through.
Okay.
That's a great idea. We could videotape the lunch meeting on the 21st.
The lunch meeting would
And
be
then-
easy because it's here at Town Hall.
Yeah,
I don't know
allow that-
about the
allow
fire
that to be
station or the
posted.
sports stable.
Mm-hmm.
We're pretty much planning on doing the same type of outreach and notification that we did with the October meetings. And so we'll put signs out, we'll notify it, or, put some blurb in the May newsletter. But the goal was to get these meetings in before people left town on summer break.
Yeah.
So that, but I think it's busy from,
I think it's
at
just
least I
busy.
feel busy from here on out.
I know. I don't think we're
But,
going to get around it, so
yeah.
we'll just
Yeah.
be aware of it. Get the word out the best we can.
Let's see. So, one of the things we talked about was staff, planning commission, Clarion, kind of working together to develop, just to sort of put all this together and get preliminary concepts and ideas. You sort of alluded to that a little bit. When do you see that happening? Are you hoping to do some of that tonight? Or
I think
we be?
I think if you guys have specific ideas about, kind of, we want to see this, this idea captured in one of the scenarios, I think that would be really helpful to talk through tonight. I think we will be working through that over the next couple of weeks, and we're intending to, I think we've got a work session scheduled with staff on, is it May 1st even? May 7th. I can't remember.
Yeah.
In early May, to kind of touch base before the meetings. So we'll have a little bit, we'll have more information to share at that point as well. And, maybe there's an opportunity, Stephen, potentially to just kind of, talk a little bit more about those at the early May Planning Commission meeting.
Yeah.
possibly.
Yep.
But I think, you know, our hope was tonight to just kind of get any specific ideas that you have down, so we can kind of work those into the conversation, and we can circle back on each of the areas and talk through those, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, maybe that would be helpful, just to go back through your slides, I think, as you were
Okay.
talking about maybe the, just to see if any of us had thoughts related to any of the.
Okay.
I'm thinking like these, the areas here, and then maybe that
Yeah, the
graphic
different
you
areas.
showed with
Mhm.
the, you know, the residential development and things, but, so maybe explain again, if you don't mind, what your thoughts are as far as how you might present possible discussion topics, or how would you present this? Or
Sure.
what-
So what we would do for the areas where we're not doing a lot of new,
Yeah.
you know, scenarios necessarily is, you know, just remind folks what the plan says about this now, what the zoning is currently. This site is not in the town currently, in the city, in the town limits. It's planned for kind of a mix of, you know, residential and community services. I'm trying to remember the right terminology, Stephen.
It's a community service area, yeah.
But since the plan was adopted, you've had the storage units come online, so it's a little bit fragmented. But you've also got an adjacent neighborhood, you know, you back up to or front onto the back of Costco. So it's a challenging site, I think, for a lot of different reasons. So some of the initial feedback we heard about neighborhood services, neighborhood commercial, probably aren't going to be that viable. You know, Matt can confirm that for us, but that's my gut feel. So I think, you know, what we want to do is explore whether the current recommendation in the plan, which is, you know, for more housing-oriented types of uses, should that stand, or should we be looking at other things, and if so, what? And
Yeah, it's an interesting area. I mean, that could be a great spot for some affordable housing.
senior housing came
Senior
up as
housing.
well.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't really have any other comments on this particular area.
I'm going to jump in because I'm struggling a little bit. I wasn't sure what we were doing tonight, and
Uh-huh.
I don't feel prepared to have this kind of discussion. I could probably get there. I'm trying to pull my notes up, and
Sure.
I also sort of had maybe in my head, a little different vision about how this might go, where staff could, I mean, I'm much more interested in sitting around a table down there with market study information back to us, your thoughts and experiences in areas like this, staff's knowledge of our opportunities, and being able to sit down and provide you with some more thoughtful
Okay.
discussion around this. So I'm struggling a little bit. I don't mind chatting a little bit tonight, but I
And
feel
I'm
like there's a
good with
piece that
it.
needs to happen here that.
Well, and Darcy can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that what you're looking for is the additional information that Darcy's team's working on right now.
Yeah.
And which we will discuss in June. So we're going to have,
Is that after community meetings though? That can't be after community meetings. The board really wants.
there's going to be 2 phases of community meetings. So there's going to be some outreach going on to the community through this initial phase, and then there's also going to be, you know, outreach to the business community at the same time. Their team is digging in further to understand the area better in terms of the market analysis, and then just the different scenarios. So I think you're going to have more fodder to respond to than you do right now at that second meeting, and then you still have time to shape that conversation, because we're going to go
Well,
back to
yeah,
the
it's the
community.
shaping of that conversation that, I
Yeah.
mean, the board has made clear that the idea was not to put everything out to the community and say, what do you want? And, you know, let's talk about it. The idea was we have professionals in town, we have a planning commission in town, we've hired a consultant to sit down and try to frame this and put some options together and some thoughts together so that when we go into these community meetings, we're not just, you know, and I haven't seen what the questionnaire is going to look like as we go forward, but I was hoping we'd have an opportunity to shape those questions as we, in this first meeting with the community. And I'm not sure I'm hearing that that's going to happen.
I think what we're struggling with frankly, it's just the timing of this and trying to get the meetings in before school gets out. So I think, as I mentioned, we are working towards having kind of more detailed, kind of options to explore in early May. That's really kind of what we were working towards, but we had to get through all of this background work to kind of inform those conversations. So we will have more of that before the meetings, and I mean, I'm happy to come back and talk.
Yeah,
more
I don't
at that
think,
time,
I
if
think we're
that's
gonna,
helpful.
I mean, this is not, I mean, I have a pretty clear understanding of what the board was expecting from us, and I would really think that we need to sit down together, and I would, again, I'd rather it be a sit around the table work session prior to these community meetings and with whatever information you've gathered, and I would slow it down before rushing past that. I think it'd be a big mistake to rush past that. So I think we all need to be prepared. There are some key residents that may want to attend that as well, that, are just generally vocal and might be interested in attending one of our work sessions, which they could be here tonight if they wanted, right? But I'm a little bit concerned we might be moving too fast. If we can work that in between,
We could probably work something in, but so if Darcy's team wanted to come back for the first of, it's May 1st meeting or May 5th meeting, the first meeting, I guess May 1st, then she could, but we're also going to be advertising. I mean, we're going to need to kind of notice those meetings in order to meet this schedule. So Darcy's, exactly right, that we're trying to work with the schedule that kind of allows us to get something to this board before we have 3 members of the board kind of change over. So it's our current board that we're working with that gave us this direction to work on the Northwest area plan. So there are just a few like push and pull constraints on timing. And then I think that we heard from both Planning Commission and the board too, that there's a certain sense of urgency to get this study done.
Yeah, I agreed, but urgency can't override the process that we were given direction to do. And the idea was not to just have Clarion put together a community meeting and go find out what everybody wants. The idea was that staff, Planning Commission, and Clarion would be able to sit down and work together, figure out what these community meetings are going to look like, try to frame them and provide something to the community that we've all had a chance to provide some input and thought towards. And if that's not there, I'm going to start jumping up and down. I'll do it after the meeting here and talk to the board members, but I don't think we can have a community meeting without all of us sitting down together and having seen the market study, seeing what Clarion's recommending, provide our own input as a planning commission and staff before this thing goes to a community meeting.
Can I ask what? I guess I'm not feeling the same level of concern.
I'm not feeling it. I was given that direction. I'll pull up the meetings. That was.
Well, we were all there.
Yeah.
I guess I'm not. I didn't hear anything in here, what we heard tonight, that would give me any concern that we're going in a direction that we weren't given, based on we don't have the market study, and I don't know that we want to. I think the intent is to take this information to the public. I don't know. I don't have a what. Can you share more me with? Can you share more what your specific concern is? Because I didn't hear anything that was of concern, I guess.
I would like the Planning Commission, the staff, and Clarion to sit down prior to going to community meetings, hear what Clarion has come up with, be able to provide input to them to make sure that we have a set of questions and conceptual ideas rather than a wide open community, what do you want to do? We're going to bring that in a little bit at least. What are some of our options? What does the market study say? And what does our staff and our planning commission, what do the professionals who are working this through have to say about this before we bring the community in? And making sure that we just have input from staff and planning commission and Clarion. And I didn't see that step in here. In fact, I figured there'd probably be more than one meeting, but I can tell by the time pressures that probably can't happen. So,
I guess I view it as more of taking not biased data. Bias is probably the wrong word, but just taking whatever the data is to the public and getting their reaction on that, rather than at this point in time, planning commission kind of predetermining, not the possible questions, because I understand where you're going. I think that, you know, kind of framing the questions is a good idea, but maybe potentially limiting, you know, options presented to them related to the market study, what the market study might say. I don't know. I would rather have the community input on what that data says. I'm comfortable with that, but I'm just one voice up here too.
Can you pull up the process slide again? So I guess the way I envision it, and I haven't gone through this myself either, so, is that, you know, phase one, as it's outlined, is the plan foundations. And so we're establishing those foundations through the outreach process. I think that we really just scratched the surface in October. And so I think we're coming back to the community with more concrete examples of what can actually happen, digging into, you know, and I think that was part of the issue with the town board is that, you know, we didn't have, I think they thought we'd have further direction and more information already, and I don't think that was the intent. The intent was for us to go out and see whether or not there was support for an outreach, and we know that we have that, but we don't know what direction we're going. So the first phase is where we're at, and I didn't envision it necessarily as needing much more, and I guess I'm struggling to know what information we can provide Clarion's team at this point to help guide the process more than
I'm not
they
looking
already
to
know.
provide Clarion's team with any more information.
I think what I'm hearing you say, though, if I may interrupt, is you want to see sort of a preview of like what specifically are we presenting to the community and having a
have
chance
some
to
input on that, and I'd
Sure.
like staff to have input on that. I assume you do. My
We
goodness,
will,
you're working
yeah.
together with the planning commission, needs to have input on that. I'd actually like us to see us sit down and just talk it through together. I'm not looking to put any bias on anything. I don't think. I think it's important I mean, my God, we can go from one extreme to the other on the options in this town, from rezoning everything, which, dear God, the town board would go crazy and would never touch anything, all the way to doing absolutely nothing. Or we can start to pick things in between those two, and we can start framing,
and that's
without
what
bias,
we-
what some of the options are, based on the market study and the analysis that you've done, the feedback that we've gotten from the community, the intelligence of the planning commission and staff who've been looking at this town for 20 years, and the history we have here. And when?
That's what we're working on
Where's,
right now.
exactly,
That's what
where's
we're
the
working on
market
right
Where are
report?
we, though?
Where's
Where-
the market report you keep referring to?
Well,
Is that
that's what she's
complete?
working on. It's not complete
So
yet.
it's not complete.
So
So
what
we
I
need
would-
that to be complete before
But
we
there's,
can move
all I'm
forward.
saying is there's no step in here where we're going to sit down and talk about this. The next thing is maybe we get another update in May, and then we have community meetings.
I
And
think what we're trying to do, I think we all agree with you. We all think that should happen, and I think it's built into the process. I think this first step is they're going to refine the questions to the public to gain input, not to get direction. I don't think that, and maybe I'm wrong here, these first community meetings are more to gain additional feedback.
So we can take that back to you guys and then have a more in-depth conversation. I mean, we're envisioning the time, you know, we come back in June and July, those are pretty heavy-duty work sessions. You know, Matt will be here to talk in detail about the market assessment. You know, here's what we heard from the community. You know, here's where we really need help from you guys. So that's absolutely built into the process. I think what we hadn't built in is sort of that, you know, really kind of going back and forth on that before we went to the public. So, you know, I think it's really just the next step. And we just, if we had all of that, you know, figured out today, we'd certainly share it with you. I think, you know, we've had a few weeks to kind of get things rolling, try to figure out a strategy to kind of address the timeline and dig in. So I think what we were hoping to do tonight is sort of frame up, you know, some of what we're seeing as those options, and what you described as, you know, what's the range from, you know, incremental change that's very modest to a pretty significant change, and, you know, what's the spectrum, you know, where does the community fall on that spectrum? So that's absolutely where we're headed, and we want that feedback, but we also know we need to get it from the community. So it sounds like it's as much a sequencing thing as anything, and I'm not sure the best way to address that, other than to say, you know, we're more than happy to come back in May before the meetings and kind of talk about that. But as Stephen said, we have that tension of having to advertise the meeting. So if we do that, you know, I think that would probably be kind of let's work through this together, kind of refine what we're going to present to the community before we have those meetings, and then we come back in June and July to kind of talk more about where do we go with this, and based on what we heard, what do we need to refine, and what are your thoughts on that? So that's kind of what we had framed up, and we're open to suggestions. So.
Okay,
So
well,
we have
you got
scheduled,
mine, so.
we have scheduled meetings for May 1st and May 15th, right? When do you expect this market study to be done?
So, as I mentioned, the market study, the way that we had worked this, because, and again, timing-wise, we didn't want to wait until end of May when the market study was going to be done to kind of get through and then do all the other pieces. So we're trying to do this on a parallel track.
Yeah.
So Matt was aiming to have preliminary recommendations or kind of insights on that in early May, so that then we can work with Cheney to kind of work through some of the options for the marketplace and refine those pieces. And so we've got a little bit of a window there in May where we were going to kind of try to bring all those pieces together and frame them up at a more conceptual level. So certainly still more defined, but still plenty of room for refinement. So that's where we were headed. So to be honest, coming back in May 1st is not going to help us much, because we need that time to get that done.
Okay.
So
So we can look forward to May 15th. Cross our fingers.
potentially, so
Which is tricky, because then there's not a lot of time to adjust, right?
we'd have a pretty small window, but it would be better than not doing that. It sounds like so.
And then, so we certainly have an opportunity to build in another meeting with Clarion or just an update from staff in May. But then looking at like the kind of the June through August time frame there, like we're not going to take this back to the board until July, and we could take it back at, I think, either meeting. I know they don't have a late June meeting this year, so I'm assuming that they're going to have both meetings in July. So we could take it to Planning Commission in early June, and then if we need to refine it again, come back to Planning Commission in early July before we take it back to the board at either one of their meetings. So we could easily squeeze in the first July meeting for PC, and then come back to Planning Commission, their first meeting, which is the second week in July, or we can get it to their last week in July if we need to. We also can kind of like, there's some room in August to work that process into as well before we really try to, because and that's, and I guess just to, to reemphasize, that we're probably going to get some criticism for not having this available to everybody, kind of regardless of what we do, but the town historically has been criticized for having any type of meeting, even development review meetings over the summer where, somebody in the town isn't aware of it. And we can't go on hiatus over the summer, but we're trying to be sensitive to that as far as our community meetings go. So that's why May is where it's at, and we wouldn't want to really push it any later. And that's why, we're not revisiting the community outreach meeting until school's back in session at the end of August. So the timeframes influenced a lot of this process, but I do think there's opportunities to come back and have the input if Planning Commission wants more input.
Could we offline and maybe not in a meeting setting provide comments on the actual presentation? Would that help, do you think?
I think this process is being overhurried. I'm disappointed in how it's going. I'm disappointed it took months for it that we lost at the beginning of the year because of the way decisions were made. And now we're being forced into completing this before some of the town board members are off the board. And I'm very nervous. That's all. So I don't, whatever you guys want to do is fine.
Can you share more with what your concerns are? I guess be more specific. I'm having a hard time understanding, like maybe a specific concern so that I can understand. I'm just having a hard time understanding, I think.
So I have no idea. I don't know. I think I've said it. I can repeat it again, but it's not sinking in, and maybe it's not. I don't know. So I'll give it another shot. I expected the Planning Commission and staff to be much more involved prior to this, even prior to any community engagement meeting. Probably at least a couple of meetings where we're sitting down and talking through this, understanding what the market study is that they came back with, so that we actually have a chance to talk about it provide recommendations, our thoughts based on our historical knowledge before it goes to the public. And I don't know what the hell's going to happen if it just goes to the public. I mean, I'm going to get totally blindsided. I have no idea. I don't know what's going to be coming forward. Maybe we'll get to see it on paper, but I don't work that way. I don't like to get emails and read through them. I just don't work that way. I like to sit down with I like to just sit down as a team and bounce ideas off of each other and have conversation about it in more of a work session type setting, not a up here at the dais type setting. Boy, specifically,
an alternative, I mean, the timeline is, the timing of the market study is an issue. And the compressed timeline is an issue. And I understand why we're trying to get this done before everyone takes off for summer. And I've heard those complaints and I've seen them online and everything. What about if we extend this into 2019? I mean, instead of just trying to pack this all in right now. You know,
I'm
we
okay
we're
with
not
that.
gonna
There
go
are
on
board
hiatus
members
over
who-
the summer, of course.
There are
But
board members who are on.
what about if we?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to get some feedback
Well,
from Martin
there'll
here.
be some
but,
new board members. I'm not concerned about who the new
Yeah.
board members
No,
are.
I know.
I mean,
I'm
they're
not
gonna have the same
terrible.
I
love
think
of the
that
town we
what
do.
our schedule would look like if we didn't make those May meetings is a lot of upfront work and maybe more time than we need. So a lot of wasted time.
Yeah, I mean, once we
Between
hit the
now
summer.
and September, when we could actually do our first, or late August, when we could first do our first outreach. So that's how I understand it, is we either hit this kind of end of May date for our first outreach, or we don't start our outreach until after the summer, which is wasting a lot of time. I mean, so it's not ideal. I understand Commissioner McCool's frustration. It's not, you know, we thought we'd probably have an approval in January, and we got started 2 months ago, but we don't. So this is, you know, the constraints that we're working under. And I mean, I understand your concern. I guess I'm probably not as concerned, just because I think that we got a good team. And, you know, and I'm more, and I'm also just as concerned, I guess, on the other hand, with continuing the momentum we had. You know, I don't want to have a delay that, you know, I think it's going to be, we've had enough of a delay. It's going to be 6 months, 7 months before we get the community back involved in the meeting that they were so passionate about in October. So we're juggling a lot of, you know, different considerations and trying to keep this moving and keep it moving towards a resolution. So, but I'd hate to see this not be resolved until the end of 2018 or carry over into 2019, because I guess I heard from a lot of comments that it was just as much of a concern to have, you know, some points where we could, you know, prioritize certain things if they were more of a concern or needed more of immediate attention than other parts of this outreach and study. So we're doing what we can, but there are certain constraints.
See, I'm concerned about us getting back to where we were in the beginning, and I think that on some level we have some responsibility for what I'm perceiving now as some redundancy in the process. I think that what we brought initially wasn't very specific or clear enough about maybe what we wanted and what we were looking for. And what I'm seeing now is that that is being defined and that it is coming into a little bit more focus. But at the same time, you know, we're going back to the community and then asking a very similar question to what we asked in October. You know, what are your preferences? What would we like to do? And I personally, I think we should be beyond that. And, you know, having some clear ideas about, well, this is what the market is asking for. This is what our town wants, and how can we merge those? So that's kind of where I'm at. And I'd like to, you know, maybe change that phase 2 a little bit, and have some more specificity and not having us at this point explore, you know, preferences about what the community wants, but saying this is what and the direction that we should be moving in.
So we will have more specificity about what we're, so just to make sure I'm explaining myself clearly. So we asked, you know, pretty general questions about preferences of, you know, is the plan you know, kind of in the right spot for, you know, should we change anything in the marketplace? And where we're going to be putting together some very specific scenarios that say scenario A would incorporate 3-story housing on the RTD, you know, just sort of very specific scenarios based on the market conditions and based on the, you know, all the other work that's been done, and saying, are you comfortable with these directions, and is this something that the town should explore further? It's sort of the next level of information in terms of, you know, we heard some concerns about housing, here's different ways it could play out. So it will absolutely be much more specific than what we asked. Because of the time delay, we will need, you know, not everyone was involved in the first round. You know, there will be that need to just kind of briefly explain, here's what the situation is, here's what we've heard so far, here's where we are, and here's, you know, now there's this other layer of information, and we still need direction on that. So it's definitely next generation in terms of specificity.
Great, thank you, I appreciate that. And one of the things that I was excited about was the 3D rendering. That shows us what we don't want to have happen. So that was good. I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, Bob, because I think that this process is going a lot slower than I would personally like to see it. And I don't know, you know, what we can do to, you know, kind of keep everyone engaged, involve everyone, but I would like to see this process go a little bit faster. So I'm fine with the meeting in March, as long as we can assure that the town and our community has some specifics about what we're looking at and what we'd like to have happen.
I just want feedback on it. I don't need to slow it down. So I mean, I just feel like there's a piece missing. That's what my very first comment was. I think there's a piece missing.
So,
And if we can, you know, I'd just like to have some opportunity to have some discussion around this before it goes to the community. And I don't think that means it needs to go out to 2019, but it sounds like, I mean, all I'm getting back from you guys is it can't happen before the
so
community meeting.
I did reach out to Martin, and he
Right.
said that if we want to deal with having the meetings in the summertime, then we can. We'll probably hear about it, you know, some criticisms about it. But if that's, I mean, I guess that's, you know, you'll need to weigh the pros and cons and make a decision on that. But if
So we
that's
have no way to get any input
an option
with Clarion and staff prior to the May 20, in
So-
between now
So
and.
what I proposed was that we could come back closer to the meeting. It probably isn't going to be very far out from the meeting, but we can absolutely come back and sit down with you and kind of hash through, here's where we are, some of the specific options we're proposing. Do you guys have some feedback on that? Anything we should change? Happy to do that.
Will that give you enough time? I mean, if there are changes that need to be made for the community meetings, will that give you an opportunity to do that? I mean, or
Yeah.
is the meeting moot because you can't do anything prior to, I mean, will you have things so
Well,
finalized or?
I feel like we're not far apart on kind of what those, I mean, I think to me what I'm hearing is, you know, the option, it's sort of really kind of.
it'll be
honing in.
refinements more than
Yeah, I
wholesale
wouldn't
I hope so, but I
anticipate-
haven't seen anything,
Yeah.
so I don't know. That's my, I mean.
No, I understand.
I mean, I can trust that everything we've talked about is going to come back and it's going to be hunky-dory, but I've been in business a really long time, and sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. And when it does, it's awesome, but when it doesn't, it can just, I mean, we could have a nightmare on our hands, right? So,
No, I hear
yes,
you.
if we have that meeting and it's all wonderful and fine and we have some tweaks, then great. If we don't, then I'm not sure what we do.
And I can share with you maybe why I'm not concerned on this step of it. Maybe we're on the same page, and maybe that'll help me understand
Mhm.
maybe why you are. My understanding maybe about what you guys are working on right now are presenting more factual types of studies based on what our current zoning would allow based on development parameters in Old Town, right? This 3D model, that's not, the opportunity for input on that I don't feel like is really critical because it's based on what our code is. And so there, you maybe are presenting at this point, here's what our code is. Same thing with the market study. Here's what the market study revealed, right? And so then you're taking that information to the public's reacting to that, and then we would come back in and take the public feedback based on that, kind of, here's what is, and then we would shape it moving forward.
See, I thought we would actually have other possibilities of things that would be happening, that could happen in those areas.
We will. To the extent we've heard clearly from the community, there's a concern. I mentioned scale and mass was one of
Right.
the things people said, absolutely, that's a concern for us. That we can test now. We don't feel like we're kind of trying to force the issue. We can say, this is something we've heard from you.
Mhm.
Here are some different ways that we can address that. Are you comfortable with either of those options? This is what it would mean in terms of, implementation. Are you comfortable with that? And that's really that next step of knowing how far you as a town want to go with these ideas. In that, that's one example in original town. But yeah, no, we will have that. And I think that's where, are we asking the right questions? That's where it would be, great to have that chance to check in and touch base on that. So.
When I think the board wanted frequent check-ins, and it may be a responsibility on their part to pay attention to the planning commission meetings, right? And I'm going to say that publicly and out loud. If they part of the check-in needs to be them paying attention to these planning commission meetings so they can see what's going on, rather than us duplicating our effort by trying to present it to the town board. So, yes, I think we need to have a meeting
Sure.
somewhere in mid-May there where you can work it in, so and again, if it can be a work session like this where we're put the tables down here rather than sitting up here and not just exactly, feed us. No, I'm just kidding. But just so we can truly just be more of a conversation style
Happy to do that.
meeting, I would feel a whole lot better, and it'd probably be just fine. I just don't know until I'm just nervous
I agree
about
with you.
it,
If
so,
we have
but-
time, I think, for us to just take a look at the options you're presenting, hey, here are the ranges of options. I think for us to maybe weigh in on that, to kind of set the guardrails, as you might say, as far as here's the parameters for where we think the board and we're comfortable, and those can be the options.
And I'd love to get whatever we can prior to that, as you think it's ready for us to see. I think that would be helpful too, just so we can be thinking. I'd like to come into the meeting prepared to, just talk about those things. And if there's some questions you have for tonight, we can get back to that. So I'm satisfied if we can stay on this timeline and just get a meeting in before that.
Okay.
So one other thing, though, before
Uh-huh.
we move on. So for those of us that are visual learners, would it be beneficial to have more of those 3D renderings kind of showing where, this could go there? This is what this would look like here.
Yep. That's exactly what we'll do with the, so that's the baseline. Here's where we are today, and what Cheney will build on top of that is, here's some different phasing that might work in terms of how might we introduce housing, how might we reuse some of the existing spaces we have. So that's why we wanted to get into the visuals, it's just a lot
Yeah.
easier to have a conversation about what those possibilities are when you're not talking intangible uses and things like that people don't necessarily grasp. So yeah, when we talk through options, we'll say, here's where we are today. Scenario 1 looks at, improving connectivity and, doing some modest adaptive reuse in some of your vacant spaces. Scenario 2 might look at, some more intensive housing on the RTD site and potentially phasing in some other, that type of thing. So, those aren't real scenarios right now, but
But
that's
I like those.
But that's that's the general direction where we're headed. So yeah, so it will be, let's talk through the visuals, and then let's talk about, likes and dislikes, and, do you have a preference? If, and that's really where the preferences come back in, is now that you have some specific things to react to, what do you think? Does it fit? And, what concerns might you have?
Absolutely. I think it's difficult for a lot of people to visualize what a 3-story home looks like next to a single-story home with a rear garage versus a street-facing garage. What a apartment complex or, a multi-unit complex would look like next to Costco versus a 3-story senior living community. So just things like that, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
And then the other piece I'd like to also see is a little bit about how you see the community meetings being conducted and
Sure.
how those look too. I'd like to.
So, so this was kind of high-level outline, again, just quick recap. Here's where we've been. If you weren't involved, this is what we did. high-level overview of the market context. I think, the average citizen is not going to want to dive into the lots and lots of detail on the numbers. We won't have lots and lots of detail. We'll have kind of preliminary findings at that point. So Matt will kind of provide that context to say, here are some of the trends that we're seeing in the region. Here's where you fit in that. How does the downtown fit into that? Just kind of paint a picture of what's possible and what's likely to occur, and how that kind of helps set the stage for, the choices that we're going to talk about. And then we'll dive into each of the areas. And for each of those, and this is just kind of our initial framing of that, little bit of context, some of what we've heard so far, how that really helped inform the choices that we've brought back for the community. If there are kind of specific goals that we can kind of put out there, we'll kind of have some initial ideas on that. And then walk through each of those scenarios. And that's where I was saying, we expect these community meetings to have a lot more kind of back and forth. We are going to have some polling involved just to kind of help give us some of that, kind of, okay, let's, sometimes it's hard to tell when you have a room full of people. If they were quiet, that could mean that they liked what they saw or not. And so we like to have that, at least some specific direction of that nature. But we'll have a lot more dialogue about, we talked about 3 options for the marketplace. What do you guys like? What do you not like? Is there some hybrid of these that we might want to explore, as a preferred alternative? And that's really, once we know what people think about 3 alternatives or 5 or whatever it ends up being, we can bring that back to you guys and say, we heard people were really supportive of senior housing, and here are the 2 options we talked about. What do you guys think in terms of that, and how do we kind of start to build that preliminary preferred direction? And that's really kind of the focus over the summer that Stephen was talking about, once we've got kind of that next level of reaction from the community, so that we're not spending a lot of time kind of developing alternatives that potentially the community isn't in support of at all. And so we kind of get that out of the way. Anything that we should take off the table based on those meetings, and then have time to kind of refine it with you guys and with the town board. So,
have you given any thought to how to weight the feedback you get based on who you're hearing it from? I mean, I know one of the trustees, and I kind of agreed with them, expressed concern that the people who live in Rock Creek who are in a planned development, right, aren't facing imminent or border development to them. And how does that weight in? Yes, they'd love to have restaurants, it's more and everything, all this wonderful stuff down here that they can drive over the hill and come down to, versus the community that has to live around it and within it and might even get added to it in the future. Do you have thoughts on weighting that? And
so not necessarily weighting it, but what we will have, and what we had a little bit of struggle with in the first phase, so in the keypad polling meetings, we weren't able to break it out like we intended to. The online, we were able to do that. So we've worked that bug out. We are able to, so we'll present that information to you in your packets of, here's what we heard from original town residents, wherever people self-selected in terms of where
we'll
they
have
live.
the information.
But
we
it's
can decide
really
how to
up,
deal with it.
we're looking at that still as a body of input from the community as a whole.
Sure.
And, that'll be part of the discussion is, but it's not going to be formally weighted.
Sure.
So
But we'll have the data
You will.
to wait, to decide how to handle it.
Yep.
Okay.
Maybe we can go a little more heavy on the advertising in original towns, so we get more of those residents to be involved in the polling.
Let me be clear. I'm hoping that we're not talking about giving more weight to one vote than another.
No, that's what you said, absolutely not.
no,
The idea
yeah,
is that
waiting.
we'll have the data
Not
to know
waiting.
it's
where it came
available,
from.
but yeah, we don't intend to weight it. It's
Yeah.
a body of information
Yeah.
from the community, but you will have the ability to look at that by area if you choose to. So.
And so you know where I'm coming from. My intent isn't so much that it would necessarily, any given thing would have to be weighted, but when I look at data and we're talking about, X, Y, Z development preferences from a community that doesn't live here and completely different from the community that has to live next to it, then the powers that be have that information so they can look at that and say, yeah, this kind of sucks for the people that live here. Yes, I get that the community over here wants it, but the people who have to live around it don't want it. Then they can make a decision whether they care about that or not. That's how I think about it. Not that it would carry any more or less weight, but that it's part
No,
of the
let
list.
me,
I think
I
we
hear
have
what
to
you're
do that.
saying. I think that, though, that creates some divisiveness. I'm your neighbor, and I care about what you think about. And,
Yeah.
I want to see what's best for our community as well as for my neighbors. So I think that, I do understand what you're saying, but I'm just not one for, I live here, so I should have a greater impact on what's happening in the community as a whole.
And that's easy to say when you're in a planned development versus an unplanned development, and I think that's the point of the folks down here.
I
is this
think it's
isn't
about
planned,
choice
but-
too,
Hmm.
It's about choice as well.
Yeah.
So I didn't have much choice. When I moved here, I moved there, and that's where I lived, and that's what's been happening. But I also have felt like I've been a part of the community as a whole, I come over to this part of town, this area, and, I talk with people here, and I shop at the stores here as opposed to, going outside of the community.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. I hear you.
You did touch on one other thing that I wanted to touch on too, is how to get the word out to not just the residents of the community, but to the businesses as well.
Yeah.
I would like to see a little bit more participation from the businesses this time. Because businesses, they want rooftops, right? They're retail businesses, they want rooftops. And it would be nice to have them be a part of this process, or a bigger part of this process, so that they feel like they're a part of the community as well. And they're just not looking at us
Yep.
to bring in customers for them, but they need to have some responsibility to our community as well. So.
Yeah, and if we, Matt's going to do kind of the one-on-one outreach initially, kind of some of the bigger pieces there. And if it turns out that the business-oriented kind of focus group in May is not as well attended as we thought, Stephen and Martin had already suggested, we may need to, we'll have the lunchtime one. If it's more convenient for for us to go over there in the afternoon and talk with people, we've got the whole afternoon. We can come back and, do what we need to do. So that's something that's probably less contingent on kind of the school year in terms of, having to happen right away. So that will be kind of our first pass. And then we fully expect we'll need to do some supplemental outreach, just to circle back from folks we haven't heard from in the business community that maybe we, think we should have. And so we can adjust that as we go, and we'll have time to do that before we meet with you guys. So.
They're trickier to pin down. So
Yeah.
we try. But
Yes.
I mean, we use the chamber and we use all means we can, but you saw the turnout we had.
Yeah.
And that was with a lunch incentive, so we'll do what we can.
We could threaten,
Well,
we
I
could
was
threaten to
thinking about
increase
all
their
those
taxes.
parking places on that one
Mhm.
exhibit. And to what extent do you think that the developer or whoever controls that land is going to participate in any of this?
You mean
Have
the
we
mar-
reached
the
out to
marketplace?
the
So
Brixmor?
we've given we've reached out to Brixmor. They actually did participate in the October study, or the October outreach, and then we've reached out to them again. We'll try to reach out to kind of their more regional level management as well, and see if we can get them to be here for, or just set up a meeting separately if, when they're going to be in town. But yeah, that's certainly a goal. And then I think, phase one is just as much about, and it was surprising, kind of eye-opening for me in October, just how much education, was a part of this too. Like how, even kind of like working through I see it kind of as matrix, like the scenario planning, like, well, we could do this, like, at a really low level, and we could improve some of the connectivity. But if, people they use the word connectivity because they've heard it. But and it would be great to have better connectivity out here. But what they really want are more foot traffic. Now you get more foot traffic is a better mix of uses that are there, at different hours of the day, rather than just businesses next to businesses and then people coming. And it's a very auto-oriented development. So I just think that those different levels of scenario building and that kind of educational piece is still. We were just kind of scratching at the surface of starting that dialogue in October, and I think that there's still a lot of that dialogue to go in this first phase, and getting those people in and getting them engaged again is is just as important as, if not more important than, anything else that we're going to do through this process. But I think that we're going to do our best to keep the momentum going as much as we can. But I don't know. I just think that educational piece is still so critical. I was learning stuff, about, I think it works perfectly for what it is. There was that opinion too, like I get to drive there and I get to leave, and it's really easy to get in and out, like.
It does what it does. Yeah, it does what
Right.
it does very well. It
But
does.
I think that, like, if you think about, like, we just got a news blurb on, Sam's Club in Louisville and how they're rethinking that proposal, and that's been vacant for I don't know how long, 7
Right.
years or something like that. This is what we're trying to avoid, and then like you think about the sequencing of all this stuff, and maybe it turns out that original town is the priority. Like the development pressure for residential is higher now than the commercial pressure, and then we also have the town center downtown Superior developing and coming online, and the sequencing of all this could work out perfectly. Like where we pretty much have a framework for that, and we have the momentum going there, and that spills over to help us, introduce a mixed-use development over here. But we do have certain steps to go, and for the Bricksmore people, I think that the educational piece, this is where I started with this conversation, so sorry, I'm finally getting back to it, but it's just realizing that, like, that if we introduce a mix of uses out here, I mean, it doesn't hurt them, if they don't want to, I think it just gives them more flexibility and more development potential coming into this area if they have those mixes with the residential and potential for more office space. I'd have to look at the numbers again, but I think they have like 688,000 square feet of development that was allowed through the PD, and I think they're like at 630. They don't have a lot more potential out there, but if we allowed it, if that's something that comes out of this study that, we need this much mix of residential and this much more mix of office in order to create a full, I don't know if it's 24-hour, but active environment out there where people are there 24 hours a day, whether or not they live there or work there or go there to shop. So that's like the context, I guess, I see is still coming out of this phase one, which is critical to.
I think too that getting the business community interested in the conversation and engaged is when they start to see the difference, and being able to sort of, if we don't get a great turnout at the May meetings, I hope we do, having that, maybe there's a presentation at the chamber, or just different ways to sort of get that information out there and kind of get that conversation.
The earlier
going,
the better,
so.
and if we can get this in front of our chamber board early. Yeah, we have a meeting coming up, and we have a scheduled date that's fixed, so we can certainly get the board engaged and get that on our agenda at the chamber, and then try to encourage businesses to come. And I assume it's all businesses, whether they happen to be the ones that are here or not. I mean, I know we'd prefer to have the ones that are impacted,
Sure.
and I think I've expressed that I'd like to see direct reach out included over to Superior Liquor, Old Chicago, Breaks Plus, Starbucks, Fire, because they're close enough to this piece here that I think that their input is pretty valuable. Sorry, Siri thinks I'm talking to her. But I think I'll bring it. I mean, we'll make sure it's on the agenda for this coming Monday. Or I think it's this Monday or next Monday. It's our board meetings.
Okay.
And you mentioned capacity planning in there, and so just listen. I know we're sort of random here, but just listening to Stephen talk and responding a little bit to the what happens down here and who has what say and what, where, and why. But the capacity part, I think, is extremely important. So, putting a mixed-use development in here, okay. I mean, I would imagine and these are the examples I want to understand. This is so you're looking for examples.
Yep.
If we decide, you're going to propose a mixed use down here, and I might want to see what it looks like if we had 100 people down here, or 500 people down here, or 3,000 people down here, and what is, or 5,000. I don't think we can get that far, but if we add another 1,000 housing units around this area, what does that do to this area? What does it do from a traffic standpoint? Do we have to start entertaining different routes for people to travel? So I might not have a problem with a bunch of people being in this marketplace if it's not impacting the neighborhoods where we live, right? Any more than would you want something dropped somewhere that all of a sudden your traffic increased by, 10-fold or 20-fold down your street where your kids play, right? So, so as we look at those scenarios, the people who are living around this area want to be able to understand what impact it's going to have on their lifestyle and their world. So, as we just talk about these scenarios, I think people are going to want to understand the impact on them, whether they're in original town, Coal Creek Crossing, Sagamore, or the new 76th Street developments, if that ends up being residential or senior center or something like that, and the Second Avenue properties. And yeah.
And I agree with you. I mean,
Yeah.
we have to look at all of that.
Yeah.
I just have problems with the idea of having 3/5 of a vote, just because I happen to live up the hill, so that was my concern, and I
Yeah,
just want to
no,
make sure
that's
we
fair.
don't go in that direction at
No,
all.
we're not, yeah.
So that's all I was saying. But no, I'm very clear about that, and I think that's what we were asking for when we started this process, is that those kind of studies, those kind of views of what it's going to look like. Once
If
it's
we
built
do.
out, what we do, if it's housing, if it's residential, if it's commercial, if it's office, and how's that gonna impact traffic on our current infrastructure?
Right.
I mean, I think that was the question we asked initially.
Yeah. So all that's on your mind and. in
Yeah,
the
no,
discussions.
Martin had already reached out to Alex and LSC to kind of let them know we are gonna have some scenarios that ultimately we need to run through the model, the traffic model, and, that sort of thing. So, yeah, no, that's definitely
Okay.
part of the plan, so.
I'd also, and this may be beyond the scope a little bit, but I mean, if there are other areas that have any similarity to this, I know there's a few of these have popped up along the corridor here. Love to understand what, I don't know if we have access to what any of their traffic is, and it's really hard to compare, what does it mean to have 1,000 cars a day, or 3,000 cars a day, or 5,000 or 10,000 cars a day going down the street? What does that look like? What does that? Yeah, it's hard to get a sense of it. If we know that, at least if you go over to Louisville along McCaslin and Dillon, and you have some idea what those numbers are, then okay, well, if it's going to kind of be like that, yeah, then okay, I could live with that. It's not that bad, right? But on
No,
the
the
flip side,
context
if
is
it's like
important,
28th
yeah.
Street in Boulder, then
Yeah.
we might want to say no.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah.
Put it in context. Similar with the visualizations, I think that we're all really responding well to.
Yeah.
Just to have some equivalent context from a traffic perspective.
Hmm.
I think for people to understand, this would feel like Colton Road, or this would feel like McCaslin now, or
Yeah.
this street in Broomfield, whatever. Just examples from a visualization perspective.
Yeah, because there's some really challenging traffic places in town that or not in our town so much, but around us.
There are a bunch of techniques to try to control that traffic too. So, that's kind of the crazy thing. It doesn't always seem intuitive, but having the transit-oriented development around the bus rapid transit, and then not allowing for residential parking or having very reduced residential parking. What they did for the transit village in Boulder was you basically have to pay for your parking. So, and there's not a lot of it, and it's shared with the hotel and the other uses that are there. But they had a goal of having, I can't remember what it was, but they really didn't want to add to the traffic.
Yeah,
in that
if you want to
area.
live here, you
And
can't
so-
have a car.
And they,
Yeah.
they monitor it, and then they're able to actually, they have all these tools in place to either raise the price of the parking spaces or whatever to help get them to the goal that they promised to meet to begin with.
Sure.
So there are other means of doing that with still kind of integrating the uses, out there. So
I think the trick too with the traffic is that you need the traffic to keep your spaces full. So it's sort of, how do we get, is it more foot traffic? Is it people coming
Yeah.
on the BRT that are, just work there? Or, those are all things we need to explore. But to
Yeah,
some
where's the
extent, you need
balance?
more traffic to keep those, the area viable too. And
Yeah.
that's the tricky part.
And I think everybody will understand that. It's just, making sure we have the infrastructure to handle it. And I just, and.
well, they're coming and going at different times too, as much as you.
Right,
can
yeah, the different
use
uses,
that,
use the
yeah.
getting office in here, which, yes, love to see more office opportunities come to us, but that was one of the ideas I heard from Clarion. Who did we listen, from Clarion?
John Elliott.
Don speak to this idea of just don't put the parking in there, and might be a problem at first, but it'll ultimately settle into what works. And if we don't want cars and you don't provide parking, then you're going to get people who don't want to have
Right.
cars, right? So
We don't seem to have a parking problem right here, so.
we
I
wouldn't
think
have
we
a parking yet.
a ways to squeeze before we feel that.
You'd have to do a lot to encourage people not to have a car in that area. That's for certain. So.
Thanks for all your thoughtful
Yeah,
work.
thank you.
These,
Yeah.
I think the graphics, the direction you're going, related to the graphics are going to be invaluable as far as communicating and hopefully getting feedback as far as what the community prefers. So I think great job so far, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from the community over these next coming weeks and months and moving it forward.
Sure.
And I'd like to just real quickly echo that. I think when we started this, it was, our vision was too broad and too fragmented. And what this does for me is kind of brings that into a little bit more focus. And I think it'll do that for the community as well. Just kind of give some focus, give some definition to what we're trying to accomplish. And I think that that's what the board was looking for as well. When we met with them, it sounded like they needed more definition. They needed a clearer vision of what we were looking for and more details about what was going on. And I'm to blame as well, but we didn't give you very clear a very clear vision of what we were looking for. I think it was kind of all over the place when we started this process. And I think we've moved in the right direction. So yeah, thank you.
This is my first go-around with Clarion, but when we began this process, one of the things that was recommended about Clarion is that they had worked with the town before. And so they have history with us, and they understand us a little bit better than another company may have. And so that gave me some reassurance, and then the town board approved them finally. And now we're moving the process forward. And I think each meeting we get, we're going to get a little bit more focused and more focused. We did have a really broad stroke when we started, absolutely. That's where you have to start. And we just work to refine that and get it down. I agree the timeline is a little tight. I recognize your anxiety, but I think with the knowledge that Clarion has, with Clarion Associates has, with the town of Superior, I have a lot of confidence in what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And going through what we saw tonight, I'm a visual learner too, Commissioner Stewart, so I appreciate that. And I'd like to see more of these in the future. And, trying to educate the Brickmore people as to the future possibilities of monetizing these empty parking lots, I think is a step in the right direction. I think it's the education that they need. You dangle enough dollar signs in front of those commercial people and those large real estate investment trusts, then they'll move. But until they see the value on the other side, or understand how to see the value on the other side, they're not going to do anything.
Yeah, and I think that just showing them if the town buys off on, more development pads out here, or, these additional uses out here, and they know that, then they'll have the incentive to come in and try to amend their plan development for that.
Yeah.
And that's just, one of the areas we're looking at. The two primary areas are, original town and the marketplace. And I think that all of these kind of scenario, what we're working with is, well, does everyone understand what, the PD for the marketplace does and what could happen out here and what may not happen because of, some of the constraints. And then the same type of conversation for original town. Does everyone understand the zoning? And that's, I guess, the other issue that we'll have to kind of be just using the term. But it is what it is. It is zoning that exists out in original town, and we're not necessarily trying to change the zoning, but we're trying to have everyone understand the zoning and then see whether or not it needs to be supplemented in one way or another in order to shape what we get in the future, and the development pressures that we're anticipating to experience over the coming years. So I agree. I think that and I guess I'd also caution that the whole conversation can still be quite broad, and we need to work to try to narrow it and kind of keep it, on this, all it is right now, I think, is this is what the potential is, and and these are some tools that we could use to change that if there are concerns about that potential. And I think that we've already seen that there are, and heard that there are concerns about some potential of both, what happens to a planned development that was, envisioned and, really for a market that's 20 plus years old, and, when did we last look at Original Town? And I think we have, even over the time that I've been with the town, the development pressure in Original Town, and as you look at the market and what lots are selling for has changed,
Yep.
Fairly considerably. So it's a good time to be doing it, and I think we're on the right track.
Is there any other feedback you wanted from us specifically that you haven't gotten yet?
No, I think this is really helpful, and I think it will
Okay.
be helpful to just kind of preview the presentation and have you guys help us kind of refine
Okay.
the message and the questions, and, we can tweak the alternatives as we need to, but I think that'll be a helpful step. So we will work with Stephen to get that scheduled in May.
Okay. Thank you for being
Thank you.
responsive to that.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd
appreciate
say
it.
to that is we don't know the development review schedule for May yet, so, we may want to work this kind of as a work session prior to a meeting if we do have a serious development item on that. That may take a couple hours to consider, so
Okay.
we'll just respond to how that development cycle shakes out. So.
Okay.
All right.
Cool.
Thank you
All right.
all.
Thank you, Darcy.
Thanks, Darcy.
Do we have a May meeting? May
We don't have a
meetings?
May 1st meeting as of now, but I imagine we'll have.
Schedule it.
Something on May 15th
On May
then.
15th, we'll have this, if nothing else. And
Okay.
I am sorry I haven't introduced Emily yet. I need to do that at the beginning. But this is Emily Clapper. This is our new budget
guys are full
analyst.
package.
Oh, great.
So,
Great.
Our new
she's gonna
budget
be
analyst?
management
Management.
analyst. Sorry, she does a
Sorry.
lot with the
I have a
budget too.
budget background,
Yeah.
but I
I'll let her kind of introduce herself and tell you about her background, but she's going to be helping with, and she already has helped with the kind of the coordination of these meeting times. So.
yeah. So hi, I'm Emily Clapper. I come from California originally, and I moved out here a few years ago. And I've been working for the city of Boulder for a few years, and in their Parks and Rec department, and working in finance and budget, and a little bit of HR. So before that, I worked in local government in California for about 10 years in law enforcement. So,
Awesome.
Well,
Welcome.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, what's your role again?
Management analyst.
Okay.
Yep.
So she's within the admin department, but she's kind of pretty broad in terms of help. She'll be primarily helping Martin and I with everything, but she's also got some support for Matt and the budget background, so which I don't have, so that's good.
Yes, my focus at university, so I did get my MPA, which was something that they were looking for, their master's in public admin. So my focus was urban management and planning, but wound up working with budget a lot. So, yeah.
Nice. Any other announcements for us?
I think other than what you guys were talking about before the meeting started was that last Monday we were here till 12:15 and the Tesla application got approved. I think the vote was 5-2. And so that will get started. We have the Thrive application coming forward on Monday. So we'll see how the board responds to that. And then I still have 3 or 4 subdivision applications in process, and a handful of them have not come back in since comments were given probably over a month ago. So we're moving through those as we can, but I assume we'll have 1 of 2, probably both in the by June coming to you guys. So
Any non-residential, anything being discussed or looked at or talked about or for the town center?
I think we're going to get an update from Branch Capital on some stuff for the core area, but I don't know when that would come. I think they've had a lot of discussions on that area, but I don't know when that would come in or what.
Just a suggestion, I know we've talked about this before, it may be helpful from a planning commissioner perspective, partly just to satisfy our own curiosity, but partly just to help us guide discussions with neighbors as far as just an update of when an application is submitted on a property, so that we know if it's kind of off limits from a discussion perspective, if it's once it hits a quasi-judicial status.
Okay.
Just a thought.
Yeah, we have applications for the Zaharias property. We have applications for the Anderson property. We have an application for the Resolute property, which is south of Autry Shores. And then we have applications for blocks 25, 26, and 27. So 25 and Anderson property were probably the closest to a meeting. Remington is is the applicant for block 25, or the remainder of block 25. And then Anderson is Boulder Creek Builders. So but those are, I think those are probably, they've each had a round or two of review. So when we get a resubmittal on those, and we have one that we're working on now for the Remington block 25. Those are the closest. But Zaharias, we have an application for, and it's we're starting to look at it, and I don't know when we'll get comments or. I mean, those processes, like the Superior Shores one, for context, that's on the Resolute property that came in September, and we've given them two or three rounds of review, and I don't know when we'll get a meeting set for that. So.
And just two questions. Is Anderson part of the PD downtown? Is that?
No.
It's not, right?
It's in Rock Creek.
It's separate.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
So that would be a rezoning.
Sure, okay.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know if we can invite Bill Jenks to give us an update at some point. I'd love to invite him if he has the time to provide the planning commission with an update on things. That would be nice.
Yeah, if he,
So-
I mean, when his
If he can.
schedule allows,
If his schedule allows.
Yeah, if he's
Just
here, so for
want to
sure.
extend the invitation, we'd love to have him come tell us what's going on.
Yeah, I know he wanted to be here for the Thrive application, and he wasn't able to get out here for that one, but he might be here for a future development application, and that would be a good time to provide that update as well.
Okay, good. Anybody have anything else?
I got one more question. Where's Ethan Allen stand?
They're still going to develop on that lot that we approved. I actually just had a phone conversation with them today. They were trying to work through their construction drawings, and they were hoping to have a building permit and construction drawings approved, I think, this week, and I still think it's possible. But there were some kinks that we, that they just hadn't responded to yet, and that Public Works was working through. So they're still moving, but obviously it wasn't, I think, when they originally came to us, they thought they'd be either built by now or certainly in process. But I don't think that they resubmitted their building permit application until February or something like that. So after their October or November approval. So it took a little while.
Okay. Thank you.
That it?